Hello, everyone. My name is Laurie Belgrave, and I am the founder and director of The Chateau, which is a pop-up queer bar and cultural space in Southeast London, situated in Camberwell. Unfortunately, due to the pandemic, currently closed, but hopefully we will be reopening at some point in the near future. I want to welcome you all to our Queer Wellbeing webinar this evening. Thank you very much all for joining us. Tonight's event has been commissioned by Thrive London and produced by Brixton Reel Film Festival. Thrive London are looking to find out how COVID-19 has affected queer Londoners, so have commissioned a survey to better understand our experiences. And the purpose of this discussion is to help us understand how the COVID-19 pandemic and lockdown has affected queer folk. The plan is to go through all the questions in the survey and answer them together with our panelists. So basically how Thrive London and Brixton Reel are doing it is they're separating the panels into different parts of the community. So they've already had a Black LGBT panel, there will be a South Asian LGBT panel, a South Asian non-LGBT panel, and a Latinx panel as well to come. So the panel tonight is focused on the experience of white queer people. During this whole event, you're going to be able to find the link to the survey in the chat. So basically feel free to follow that link and take the survey with us or complete the survey after the webinar in your own time. We really want to hear your stories, basically. Today in this panel, we're going to be talking about some of our experiences and some of our stories relating to the pandemic. But we really want to know how you're feeling and what services you've been using and how things could be done better in the future. So please, if you have a moment, take the time to fill out that survey. It'll be really helpful. As an added incentive to take that survey, if there wasn't enough incentive already, everyone who completes it will be entered into a prize draw for a hotel night and dinner for two at the Blue Orchid Hotels in central London. There we go. Throughout this webinar, the questions are going to come up on the screen, so you're going to be able to see them, and together we're going to answer them, sharing our stories and experiences and discussing potential ways London councils can be better prepared to support our needs in the future. To do this, we've got a fantastic panel today of mental health professionals and queer creatives. So I'm next going to hand over to everyone to introduce them, introduce who you are, what you do, and your pronouns as well for me, please.
So I can begin.
Yes.
Thank you, Laurie. My name is Jacob Engelberg. My pronouns are he, him. I am originally from London, but now I live in Brighton. However, I do work in London still, so hopefully I have something to contribute in that respect. I'm currently completing a PhD in film studies at King's College London. Where I'm looking at issues around bisexuality and cinema, and kind of looking at bisexuality in kind of critical academic contexts is part of the work that I do, and hopefully that's something that I can bring to the table tonight. And yeah, I also teach film studies at King's College. So yeah, I'm very happy to be here.
Fantastic, thank you, Jacob.
Is it my turn?
Yes. Sorry.
Sorry. Sorry, the sound went. I was like, okay, sorry. My name's Josephine. I do a couple of things. I work at Fringe Film Festival, Queer Film and Arts Festival, I should say, which happens in London. We're in our 10th anniversary this year. I'm a programmer, and as we are a voluntary group of people, and we all do a little bit of everything. I do events and a whole variety of stuff with them. I also am a practicing midwife in Hackney, and I have been working doing caseloading with vulnerable families. I'm also a trained intensive care nurse, and I currently work at NHS Digital doing user research.
Wow, that's a lot of things.
Yeah.
I often find that with many queer people, especially queer creatives, doing a lot of things at once is quite common. So yes. That multitasking. Are you doing some of the Fringe Film Festival online at the moment? Is that something that's happening?
Almost all of it, yeah. So our program is coming up. We're finalising the program at the moment, but we have been having events, online events through the year, and the festival itself is going to be a blended mix of online events and live events.
Okay, amazing, exciting. So we're going to have one more panelist today, who's going to be Lucia Blake. So when Lucia joins us, I'll get her to introduce herself. I think for now we can get going, if that's all right with everyone. And then when Lucia is ready, she can join in on the chat as well. Alrighty, so I've got the questions here. So, as I said in the intro, we're going to go through, we've got about 10 questions here. We're going to go through these questions one by one, and we're going to share some of our experiences and thoughts on them. And then once we've gone through all of the questions, we're also going to open it out to a Q&A and a chat, so that anyone who wants to can also give their input to the panel. And this is going to be taken forward into eventually being made into a report. So anything that people share, especially in that survey, is really hopefully going to make a difference to how queer people in London. Oh.
Hi, oh my God. Literally, my apologies. I do not understand what happened with that taxi. We've been in it for like an hour and a half.
No worries at all. This is actually perfect timing, because we were just going to go on to the first question. But before that, is it okay, Lucia, for you to introduce yourself to everyone?
Yes, so my name's Lucia Blake. I'm the founder of London Trans Pride, Transmissions and Harpies, which is the UK's first LGBTQ strip club. I've been working in nightlife and trans activism for the past 2 to 3 years. That's me in a nutshell.
Okay, perfect. So we're about to fire into the first question, which I will read out, and also I believe it's going to appear on the screen somewhere as well. Oh, lovely. There we go.
Oh,
it's there. Okay. Let me get this. So, what has helped or made it more difficult to cope with the pandemic and social distancing measures, including lockdown? So that is our first question. Now, I don't know if we're going to get a format together for how this is going to work, how we're going to operate, but does anyone want to jump in on that question to start with? Okay, I can start then. I'll start with something. For me personally, in terms of coping with the pandemic and everything that's been going on, I've really found, especially the more latter stages, when I've got to grips with my brain a little bit, is about creating a structure for myself, a structure that includes the kinds of self-care that I think that I need in order that I can operate and my brain can operate in a sort of healthy way. I think finding a routine is really, really, really helpful, especially for me, like when the pandemic started and when lockdown came into force, basically, as many queer people experience, especially in the industry that I work in, which is events and nightlife, everything disappeared overnight. Everything we've worked for the last 6 months to a year got cancelled. So in those following days and weeks where there was really no structure and we were just left alone with our brains, I found that finding ways that I can make sure I'm getting out of bed and doing something with the day, getting outside, doing a bit of exercise, all that kind of stuff, like much more so than in previous pre-pandemic times when I wasn't maybe that amazing at doing those things for myself. I found that it became really, really crucial for me being able to keep, in order to keep my headspace feeling even vaguely positive when the world felt like everything was going wrong,
Yeah, I mean, I actually went back to the front line during lockdown, and so I actually felt like I didn't experience it as harshly as lots of other people did, because I really had somewhere to get up and go to of a morning. And it was really weird because I was in a hospital in a maternity unit, and it was like tumbleweed. There was no one around. So this was really weird. People had to come in necessarily on their own people were freaking out and very upset. And also the camaraderie was amazing. So I feel like people came into the hospital and were really scared, but like the amount of love that was shown, I feel like the staff, like everyone who worked in the hospital, was really turned on like the high beam of love for everyone that we were seeing, and also among the people who were working there was like an incredible rapport. And also like the community pitched in incredibly around us. I think I probably gained about like 10 kilos during that time, because we were getting free food delivered to us 24/7, and it was amazing. Yeah, it was really incredible. So, and I know that I was really kind of privileged in that way, and that was quite a personal thing. But also I think what was really invaluable was like technology. I mean, if this had happened at another time when we didn't have the internet, it would have been just so much more traumatic. Just the ability of having, being able to have, the really cliched like quiz night, like how many, we all how many quiz nights did we all do in those first weeks? And Zoom really came into its own. There was House Party was massive for a while. All of those people suddenly got quite organized, and got actually, like, the queers got super organized. And like some of the raddest events that I've been to were, like online events during that times, because people were just so full of the need to connect and actually full of creativity. So yeah, that was a massive protection, I think.
Yeah, I think the technology aspect and what's happened with nightlife and online parties and all this stuff is amazing. And I think that what's really cool is that I think that feels like it's going to be here to stay, or elements of that will be here to stay. And the conversations that it's brought around accessibility, which, for queer spaces, there aren't many queer spaces in London which are accessible, wheelchair accessible, barely any. And, the Chateau was a basement venue, as is Vogue Fabrics. And, Dalston Superstore's got steps up to it, and the Glory's got a myriad of issues if you're in a wheelchair. So actually these parties going online and being accessible to wheelchair users and to people with other disabilities as well, like, it's really kind of revolutionized, I think, the way that we think about partying within the queer community.
No, for sure. I think, what both of you have said about Laurie, about the importance of structure and the difficulties in finding that. I also live by myself, which is good in some respects and bad in some respects. I think people that were living in crowded houses had their own kinds of issues. But I think in terms of actually giving yourself a structure to the day and only being really accountable to yourself is quite a tough thing to face every day. It does take connecting with others, using technology, using the internet, which, if you're lucky enough to have it, that is. And when thinking through what the kind of difficulties were, the situation that I found myself in was quite a specific one, because I'm polyamorous, and I think the issues inherent to the lockdown for polyamorous people, it's not really a thing that you want to, or at least that I don't want to, like, go up and be like, it seems like a frivolous topic to bring up, like, boohoo, I can't see my two partners or whatever. But I think here's a good space to maybe talk about that a little bit. That so one of my partners lives locally to me, the other one does not, and the very lockdown rules made us have to make very difficult decisions about who I see first, and about what kind of contact we can have with each other, and those were really quite heartbreaking conversations to have at the time. And I think polyamory is much more practiced among queers, and yeah, I think that that's an aspect of the lockdown that I found particularly difficult, to have to make those decisions, and yeah, and being caught between my partners in that sense.
I think it's fascinating to hear that, actually, and I think one of the really interesting things about our community is the myriad of different experiences that people have, and I think it's really great for you in this forum to be able to talk about that, which isn't something that I've heard anyone talking about in relation to the pandemic. So thank you for sharing that. Lucia, did you have anything to add on this question before we move on to the next one?
Yeah, well, I was actually also just really interested listening to Jacob as well, because I should imagine it. Well, you're basically, choosing between family members, and in a sense, like, oh shit, one's gonna think I love the other one more. Sorry for swearing, by the way. I can imagine that's like a really painful dilemma to be in. My experience of lockdown wasn't pleasant, to say the least. I went to some really dark places towards the beginning, which I'm sure most of us did. I was living alone in a bed sit, like a room the same size as like a prison cell, where like the couch touched the sink and the bed was on top of the mezzanine. So I was really contained in this really tiny small space. And I've just been go, 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 workaholic. Like Lottie knows, Lottie's the same. me and Lottie went to Glastonbury together, by the way, so we know each other.
We were working, in theory, but...
Oh yeah, we went, say we were working, we're workaholics. We can't even go to Glastonbury without working. So then suddenly it was everything we've been working for, everything we've been building just stops. And suddenly in this tiny room, same size as a prison cell. And I just remember I had this floor-length mirror, and suddenly I was faced with all my underlying mental health issues. And the main one being gender dysphoria. I hadn't been taking steps towards hormones or laser hair removal. I was really unhappy with my body and my gender presentation. But I patched this up with partying and work and, to be honest, the love and acceptance from my community. And it wasn't until I was forced to stare in this mirror for 24 hours a day that I realised that there was things that I wasn't happy with, and there was things that I needed to change for my well-being overall. So that was a really negative and horrible experience for me that ended up being a positive. Because since I've started laser hair removal, I've started hormones, I've got a boob job.
Yeah, you look fantastic, by the way, I meant to say.
Thanks, Angel. So I've started taking more care of myself in that sense, and focusing on my transition. And then another thing that was really hard was income. As a trans person, I've never really felt comfortable going to a job centre, being on the dole. Whenever I go on the dole, I end up getting kicked off there. I feel the same about all kinds of official services, such as doctors, GPs, hospitals, job centres. So I was living in an illegal squat. I was getting all my money illegally, and because I lived in an illegal squat, I couldn't apply for benefits either. So I couldn't get housing benefit or anything. And the landlord was like, you've got nothing to protect you. We can just kick you out at any minute. So I had to rely on on the internet and on social media. I took my LGBT strip club live, and we started doing the live shows that brought a bit of money in. And then also GoFundMe. I relied a lot on GoFundMe. I think if it wasn't for GoFundMe, I wouldn't be here today. So yeah, that was my experience.
Amazing, thank you very much. I mean, I think we could probably talk about this one question for the whole hour. But it's really great to start, and I'm sure that we'll unpack some more of the things that you've talked about in the following questions, which I can actually definitely see with this question number 2 really does relate to the first question, which is that, did you feel supported by those around you, and how did this help? So I think what we've already established is that everyone, even within this group, was in really different situations during lockdown, so Lucia in the bedsit on your own, and Jacob living on your own, but with these issues around polyamory and what you're going to decide to do. I was in a house share with 6 people, So it really did, you know, it's like you start to see any issues, like someone who leaves their washing up on the side 6 weeks in, you're like ready to burst, you know. So that kind of thing like bubbles up, and obviously deeper issues as well, you know. But yeah, so did you feel supported by those around you, and how did this help? Maybe Jacob, do you want to start on that?
Yeah, sure. I think it was a really kind of good experience to see kind of what Josephine was describing, with people kind of coming out to show that support. I think in a more kind of microscopic level, that happens with friends as well. People come out of the woodwork in nice ways, and luckily I felt really nicely supported by friends and partners, and also by people in medicine. So my GP and my therapist were both very good at making that transition towards online, but also experimenting with like trial and error to see what kind of formats worked best for us to have those kind of consultations. And with my GP, that was actually making the consultations more regular. So she was actively checking in with me quite regularly. So yeah, I found those kind of official modes of support actually, they really worked for me, and I was quite heartened by the creativity of their approaches as well.
Fantastic. How were you keeping in touch with friends and the people around you through this period? Was it online, like Zoom or FaceTime, or you know, was there a particular way that you were keeping in touch with people and they were giving you support?
Yeah, lots of Zoom and FaceTime. The day that Josephine said of quiz nights, watching things simultaneously with someone else, to be like being on the phone and be like, okay, countdown, 3, 2, 1, press play. It's something, and it is a way of connecting with other people. And I think what this has really taught me, the experience of lockdown, is that there are digital forms of intimacy that do feel just as real as IRL. And I mean that in terms of like the friendly sense, as well as the romantic sense, that that you can feel close to people, and that strange thing of just pressing play at the same time and knowing that you're reacting to something at the same time as someone else. I used to be very strict about like not texting during films, but that kind of went out the window because there was just that joy of like, oh, that bit. So yeah.
Amazing. Lucia, did you have any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I mean, as I was saying earlier, like, you know, all my income just stopped. I had no help from the government. So like, my main thing was, you know, how am I going to eat? How am I going to keep this horrible bed-sit roof over my head? You know? So I guess I started fundraising and then putting my parties online, in which, like, you know, the community showed up. The community came every Friday to our online harpies, sent all their love and sent all the money in and stuff, and, you know, and like kept me alive. In a sense, like, what would I have done without social media and without the queer community to like rely on and look after me? That's why, like, I have this debt to like our queer community, because like they've, you know, saved me so many times, and lockdown is one of them times, and that's why like I'll forever like be in debt to like those on social media and stuff. And then of course, then there's like mental support as well. Yeah.
I think it's really interesting because maybe we had in some ways the similar experience of being, you know, we lived our lives in nightclubs, essentially. You know, that is, we were surrounded by these people constantly, all the time, you know, 3-4 nights more a week, you're in these spaces surrounded by this community, and you get that very sort of physical feeling of community and support and love within those spaces. And for me, that was the Chateau, like every weekend, and for you it was Harpies every Friday, and in, you know, the Glory or wherever else you're performing, and maybe for Josephine and Jacob potentially similar in different spaces. But you know, and that to be taken away overnight, it really, it did something very profound to me on a very, very deep level. And I think that what was amazing was that the online thing started to happen pretty quickly. And, you know, Queer House Party, who really rose really fast, like within, you know, a week or two of lockdown, and they're throwing these parties and there's like thousands of people, and people were finding that way. But for me, it was kind of like not being surrounded by quite a specific group of people that surrounded the Chateau and would be there every weekend, including, you know, the staff members, our regulars, all this stuff. So, you know, that change and that lack of physical support, really, it took me quite a long time to adapt myself to being able to exist without that, or, you know, with it, but in a very different way, you know, not experiencing it in that physical space. So yeah, Josephine, did you have any thoughts on this question?
Yeah, I mean, I had a really interesting kind of moment. I mean, I think there were lots of amazing mutual aid networks that kind of really sprung up, and people were just, you know, volunteering to, you know, there were signs up everywhere, and I was in loads of chat groups, and my phone was exploding with, you know, people offering all sorts of stuff. But what was really profound for me and really disturbing was this emergence of like conspiracy theorists that's gone on and has actually kind of escalated the longer things have gone on. And like quite a few people I know are hook, line and flippin' sinker into anti-lockdown, not just like, I mean, of course people, you know, I understand there's been like a hectic impact on people's livelihoods, and you know, people are quite rightly suspicious about the lack of transparency, of course, but like there's a really marked, terrifying movement that is like the whole QAnon thing, and it's intersecting with lots of other things that are going on, like generally with the rise of the right everywhere. So there's horrendous stuff happening in Poland, there's a huge rise of fascism, and somehow hippies and people, there's like this really unlikely and like somewhat unprecedented, sorry, that's the only time I'm going to use the word unprecedented in this conversation, this alliance of people who I would have previously kind of been expecting to be in a supportive relationship with, people who have, you know, there's, you know, who I've been friends with for quite a long time, and who I would have imagined myself having an affinity with. I'm listening to them and seeing the things that they're posting, and just, for me, that's been a major kind of source of support gone, because I'm like, you're demented, sorry, but like, and what you're not seeing is that you're aligning yourself with dangerous groups. And I think queers understand that Nazis want to kill us, and they've done it before, and we're not welcome, our lives are not welcome, they don't value anything about trans identity, you know, gender identity. It's, they want people, you know, what the vision that they have for humanity is grim, and they're buying, lots of people are buying into this wholesale, and it is terrifying. And so, you know, it started off with kind of drifting out of contact with a few people, like, and now I'm in a full scale, my support circle has actually changed quite a bit, because much as I respect people's right to have an opinion, obviously we can't have an equal conversation. And I feel also that because there is maybe in my community people that I hang out with kind of political in particular ways, and we have thinking about intersectionality, and we have different conversations. We're interested in sincerely committing to political support and emancipation of different groups, and we have a lived history of these kinds of things. And so there hasn't happened so much in my queer community, which have come into being like even more of a beacon of light for me, you know. So I think it's like fortified my connections within the queer community in lots of ways. But yeah, it's terrifying what's happening around generally,
Yeah, I think that you know, talking about like coping things, and like social media is such this like double-edged sword, because you know, especially Facebook is full of so much stuff that is, you know, people being, in my opinion, just completely mad in terms of their opinions, you know, because you're stuck in your Facebook timeline with like, you know, Brenda from when you were at secondary school. So you know, you're exposing to all these opinions of people that really are not helpful for you, because it becomes quite a conflicting space, and then you know, you can really get sucked into arguments and comments and all this kind of stuff. So I really had to limit you know, my use of especially Facebook, because I think that part of that, like maybe self-care, if for want of a better term, is about keeping that circle of people that you're seeing kind of aligned with how you feel about the world, because everything seems so messed up that we really don't want to be having to deal with like the opinions of someone that really aligns with like far-right Nazism on your Facebook timeline when you're like doing a scroll at 11 p.m. before you go to sleep. You know, there's a time and a place for combating that head on, definitely. And, you know, the trans pride march on Saturday, and, you know, those kind of, that's where we're going to shout loudly, but it is not on your Facebook timeline at midnight, just before I'm trying to sleep.
That's right.
So I'm just going to remind everyone, anyone that's watching this, any audience members, that you can share your comments and questions in the chat. So you can write it in the chat to all panelists, and then if you've got anything you want to mention, we can maybe talk about it through the discussion, and also at the end there's going to be this little period for us to talk about any questions the audience may have. Okay, going to move on to question 3 now, which is, how can the experiences of the less well-heard groups be better fed into mental health? Oh, I lost the question there. How can the experiences of the less well-heard groups be better fed into health, mental health, and social services, so they can be better prepared to support them in future? So I might start off with Lucia on this question, if that's all right, Lucia, just because you mentioned that you felt very underserved by the services. So maybe if you can elaborate on that a little bit and give any pointers for what might have helped or make those services feel more accessible to you.
So, well, the thing is we've been having this question for a long time in the trans community. And our idea was, we need more consultations. You know, you need to have consultations with the trans community. And then eventually, you know, we got that. We got the Gender Recognition Act form. A questionnaire to do with the reformation of the Gender Recognition Act about 2 years ago. And then the problem is that they give this consultation out to the whole of the public of the UK, you know, so to listen to the voices, why would you crowd that up with the voices of the wider public who know absolutely nothing of what they're talking? Because the GRA then became like this almost kind of weapon and this battleground between trans people trying to speak about their experiences and tell the government how healthcare systems, how like the workplace, how education needs to change to better provide for the trans people in the UK. And then also like TERFs. TERF is spelled TERF and stands for Trans Exclusionary Radical Feminist. This wave of transphobia and propaganda uses feminism as a guise to kind of like justify itself, and it was born in like the second wave feminism era. So now you'll see like women like Jermaine Cleo, who's, you know, done a lot of amazing work for feminism, you know, coming out and unfortunately slaying trans people in the media. So yes, that's what happened with the GRA. And then the results came in, the results were sat on for a long time. Earlier this year, trans people started saying, you know, we want to know the results of the form for the Gender Recognition Act. And then Liz Truss, the newly appointed Minister for Equalities and Women, came out and said that she wanted to protect women's bathrooms and stop trans kids from having access to health, trans-related healthcare. So for those who don't know, there's been a debate in the media, well, within general society, for a few years now about whether trans women should be allowed to use women's bathrooms. Of course, you know, trans women have been using women's bathrooms for a long time, but unfortunately there's a hateful minority that is spewing vicious propaganda that men and sexual abusers are going to pretend to be trans women and sneak into women's bathrooms to assault women. I don't really understand why being transgender would free them from prosecution of this. As far as I know, being trans is not a free badge to go and sexually assault people, so I do not know why that would help them at all. And I certainly don't know why I should be expected to not use public spaces in case a sexual predator attacks a woman, because I'm not a sexual predator and I've never acted that way for people to believe. So yeah, so it's a tricky one at the minute. I think my answer to that question will be consultations, but only open them to the people that they actually affect. Otherwise, they're completely pointless and they become weapons for like the far right and hate groups. And then another thing I'll just quickly say is to get people from less heard positions into positions of power that allow people access to the services. For example, we want something that we work with, Action for Trans Health, Transmissions works with them, and we've been campaigning to get trans people into university and more trans people to become doctors, so that more trans people are then going to the gender identity clinics and being the people that grant access to other trans people, rather than us going to gender identity clinics and trying to explain this. Frankly, it's a phenomenon. You know, we can't really explain why people are trans. The same reason we can't explain, you know, why people are gay, or, you know, just general things about our soul, why we exist. There's so many questions we can't answer. Why we're trans is one of them. So we definitely can't really explain that to cis people. It needs to be trans people that we're speaking to in these services, and that's why there needs to be more trans people in positions of power. And that goes for every minority as well. I say trans people because I'm just talking about my experience, but that also goes for like people of colour and people from like different religions and stuff.
Thanks, Lucia. I think that second point is really, really interesting. And, you know, it's like thinking about what needs to change in order that those spaces are filled with trans people, are filled with people of colour, so that these conversations, you know, when you're talking to people working in hospitals or talking to people in the higher levels of management of organizations, that they understand from a lived experience how to treat these issues sensitively and how to prioritize the needs of these communities, which at the moment, you know, in the higher levels of management of, you know, councils and local government and, you know, lots of organizations, businesses, you know, you're finding predominantly, to generalize, a lot of men, a lot of white men who aren't going to be able to understand in any way the viewpoint of someone from a marginalized community. So Jacob or Josephine, do you have anything to add on this question?
Yeah, I can go. Because I think that there's maybe some crossover between what I have to say and what Lucia was saying. I think for bisexual people, there's a real kind of epidemic that's been happening around mental health for a long time, and that many people in the UK has shown over and over again that bi people have higher risk of suffering from depression, anxiety, eating disorders, suicidality, and substance use. And that's compared to both gay and lesbian people and to straight people. And And one of the things that happened during lockdown that really shone a light on this, I think, was when the LGBT Foundation reported data around the kind of calls that they were getting on their helpline. And they got a 450% increase in calls related to biphobia. That's in comparison to a 100% increase in relation to transphobia and a 52% increase in relation to homophobia. And I think it really goes to highlight that for bisexual people, the lockdown exacerbated quite a lot of pre-existing mental health conditions, and that in households you might obviously be a child with a queerphobic parent, but also bisexual people might be in relationships with straight or gay people who are biphobic, who are abusive. We know that intimate partner violence is experienced by bisexual women at a disproportionate rate to lesbians and straight women. So I think something like the lockdown really shines a light on these things. And so I think in terms of thinking about changes that could be made or ways to address this, I think that there needs to be, similarly to what Lucia was saying around issues pertinent to trans people, that there needs to be active consultation of bi people, but also a lot of this research has already happened. And we know the findings of surveys. And what needs to take place is actual things that address the specificities of bisexuality, of biphobia, that actually disaggregate bisexual from the LGBT acronym in useful ways, so we can learn things about that and apply them in healthcare settings. Myself and other bi people that I know have had bad experiences in sexual health settings where our sexuality is assumed to be the last person we slept with, and depending on who that is, you will be kind of labeled straight or gay. And that's not only annoying, but it also has the potential to impact the kind of healthcare we're getting, and we might not get the kind of healthcare we need. We might not be asked the kind of questions that need to be asked, depending on us being basically interpreted through a gay straight binary in a way that doesn't account for us. So I think, yeah, in terms of those things, there are lots of things that we can learn from the moment. And the message that I'd like to take away from, like people to take away from today, is that there are specificities to bisexual people and biphobia that need to be addressed in healthcare. And the final thing that I'll just say in terms of the question being about the groups we hear from less, I think one of the groups that's often forgotten about is queer asylum seekers, especially in our country with the Tory government's hostile environment policy. There's a great deal of asylum seekers who end up in detention if they have tried to claim asylum on the basis of their sexuality or gender, and have that not believed. And that's particularly a case for bisexual asylum seekers, because there's the assumption of, if you could be in a straight relationship, then why don't you just do that? And I think that COVID has been such a disaster in prisons and detention centres, and that an expansive kind of radical queer politics will look to the situation of queer asylum seekers as one that should be on our agenda, and those people as members of our community as well.
Yeah, I mean, thank you, Jacob. So many really, really interesting points in there, and thank you for unpacking as well. For people watching this chat, they may not understand a lot of those issues around bisexuality and the way that it's viewed, and the myriad of issues that bisexual people may encounter when accessing services. So it's fantastic to hear all that, and I'm sure that's going to be super, super useful information. Josephine, did you have anything to add before we move on to the next question?
Not massively. I mean, I think Lucia and Jacob have summed it up really eloquently, and I can see it's 7:45 and we're only halfway through. So I'm happy to pass on this. Okay, I mean, if it comes up in the chat later, we can, but that's fine. They've done a really good job.
Sorry, Josephine.
Yeah, it is. We were meant to sort of take 5 to 10 minutes on each question, and we've done 40 minutes roughly on 3 questions, so we're probably a little bit over. So what we might do moving forward is, you know, at the moment we're going to everyone, but it's like if people want to have some focus in a question, they can kind of have it, and we don't necessarily need to get the full 5 minutes from each person, because it's so easy to all these issues, it's so easy to talk so much because they are our own lived experiences. So yeah, I'm just seeing in the chat they're not too worried about time, so we'll see, but I'm sure you've all got places to go. We don't want to be here till 11 p.m. Okay, right, I'm gonna move on to the next question number 4, which is what changes are needed to make London a more inclusive place to live, work, or grow? You know, I think this is a really good question, and I think that it kind of gets into the core of what we're here to try and talk about. And, you know, how do we want the future to be in London? How do we want the future to be for our community, for marginalized people? So yeah, maybe Josephine, if you want to start on this one, that would be fantastic.
Okay. I mean, my top comment would be, I mean, there's a lot, but I think accommodation really is the first thing that we have to say. I mean, Lucia, you're just talking about, you know, probably like I'm sure it's not a cheap bed sit. Like, you're probably paying a goodly amount of money for a tiny spot that.
It was £700 a month.
Wow. I mean, honestly, you know.
And I had to pay £1 to use the shower every single time, £1 coin. And this one time, someone had pooed in the showers.
My God.
Like, it weren't livable human like living conditions at all.
I mean, that's exactly it. You know, this is so bad and so wrong, and you know, that people have to, that, you know, so much money for terrible accommodation that, you know, it's just desperate for people, and it has a real impact on people being able to live here. So many people actually. There's just been a mass exodus from London. Like, lots of the community have just decamped, you know, to outside London, back to their parents' places, or to wherever they can just get to outside of London. Because landlords have been doing incredibly unscrupulous things, putting up rent even though they're not supposed to be, evicting people even though they're not allowed to. And so it's actually, you know, we've had one wave in the queer community already with all of our nightclubs and spaces being obliterated, and secondly, now we can't even afford to live here in lots of ways. So it has a massive impact on people's well-being, basically. And I think that's all I'm going to say for now.
Okay,
I was just going to say, so what changes? So I just read the other day that in Barcelona, they've said to landlords, I mean, I don't know if this is true, but it was in the Financial Times or something, so it must be real, that if landlords, they have a month to fill their space to get tenants, and if they don't get tenants, it's going to be claimed as social housing. Wow. And I'm just like, this here now, okay? There's so much space. There's no reason for anybody having to pay £700 for like a tiny space. There's so many empty buildings. Nobody should be homeless. Nobody should be having to pay that amount of money. And radical action on accommodation is needed now.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, thank you for that. I think because this question, there is so much to talk about, I think we probably will go around to everyone one by one, because I think everyone's got something to input on this. I think it really is a core question for this panel discussion. I think I'll add on to, in terms of the space and the available space in London, and you're specifically talking about housing, but I think for me, you know, and I'm a little bit biased as this is the area that I work in, but I think that the protection and support for queer spaces and for spaces that are needed by marginalized communities in general, not just the queer community, is really, really crucial to London's future for our communities being stable and supportive and inclusive. You know, I think that if we take the example of the Chateau, which is in Southwark Borough in southeast London, actually Southwark has lost all of its LGBT spaces in the last year. So, you know, there's some figures that were being thrown around a couple of years ago, which are really significant figures around the loss of queer spaces in general across London. I believe the figure is around 56%, 58% have gone since 2006. In Southwark Borough, it was 67% since 2006. And so to take Southwark as an example, at the end of 2019, XXL closed. Whether or not you're someone that goes to XXL, it's still a very large and significant LGBT venue. Also, DIY Space for London sadly has closed at the start of lockdown as well, which is an amazing venue doing a lot of accessible queer events. It is actually wheelchair accessible as well, which is very rare. And the Chateau is now closed, and sadly we won't be returning to our original home in Camberwell. So Southwark is now left with no queer venues. And I know from my experience of running a queer venue, the only way that we can run this kind of venue in London post-pandemic is if we get support from the councils and from government and from funding bodies. We cannot run it on a financial model that will make enough money to sustain it. I realized that running the Chateau quite quickly. You know, so there are some more gay orientated venues that maybe do make money, but, you know, for us, it really was about putting forward an inclusive queer programming, making sure that the most marginalized people in our community felt welcomed. And doing that, it's not compatible with making lots of dollar over the bar. So basically, I really, really want to see more support for these spaces, because I think that actually they provide a huge amount of service to the community. You know, we were often a first port of call for people who were struggling. You know, we can point to people towards mental health services they can get to. You know, we can actually provide quite a lot of kind of pastoral care for people who are struggling through the networks that we have in our space. And actually, I'd like to see that extended. I'd like to see spaces like ours being given more responsibility to be able to support our community. But that's only going to, you know, outside of nightlife, because I think it's quite limiting just to be operating a nightlife space. You know, I want to do daytime stuff. I want to have a cafe. I want to have workshops, all of these things, you know, artist studios, this kind of space that we need. And I really feel the only way that is possible is through support from government and from local government and the councils. So yeah, that's kind of my main point on this, which comes very much from my sort of personal experience of it. Lucia, would you like to lead on from there?
Yeah, no, literally, like, because also like Mixed Garage is like closed down as well.
Right.
And like Inferno was meant to be moved from there, which is
Yeah.
obviously like one of the biggest like queer techno nights, and you know it was home to like Pussy Palace for many years. So yeah, it's like we're losing spaces that, like, you know, we didn't even have enough to begin with, as you said. You know, 50% since 2006 have gone, and I know for like people like myself, I basically live in those spaces. You know, I didn't really feel safe in public. You know, as we said about like bathrooms and stuff. I spend my daily life, I wake up in my apartment, I get a cab to either Vogue, Fabrics, Dalston Superstore, The Glory. It would be in the Chateau if I lived in South. I used to come and see it every now and then because I'm a North East girl. But, you know, like my free, like, local LGBT venues, because that's where I feel safe. That's where I can use the bathroom without people questioning my gender. That's where, you know, I'm not going to be sexually harassed. I'm not going to be, like, publicly like bullied and questioned and like name called, and so that's where I've existed since being trans, and that's where I found all my friends, like my friends who are because my family like disowned me for being trans, apart from my mom, but like cousins, grandparents, aunties, uncles, they all disowned me, so I had to find a new family, and I found that family in the club. If it wasn't for the club, I really do not know where I'd be right now. You know, I can't even imagine a life without these spaces for us to exist, for us to find our own identities, and also to birth movements. You know, like the recent, like, most great, like, political movements all comes from, like, music and club culture, and, you know, there's always that culture that accompanies a political movement. And, you know, it's the same with, like, transness. Like, we discussed London Trans Pride in a smoking area in a nightclub after a few drinks. Do you think we could organise a festival for thousands of people? Why don't we try it? Do you know what I mean? It's where all the like magic happens, in a sense. And I think, as Lottie said, you know, we need more support from the government to support these venues and keep them going. I know, like, because obviously, you know, my home's Vogue Fabrics, they've just got Arts Council funding and are going in more of like a community centre direction. So that would be like my advice to like queer venue owners, is to really like make yourselves a staple in the community, in the sense of like doing artist residencies and like feeding the homeless and stuff like that, and really making it so that the government and the council like just can't get rid of you in a sense. I think that's the trick.
I think that it's interesting because actually for us at the Chateau, that is the direction that we're moving from, very much a bar focused nightlife space into a space that's going to offer a lot more. And, you know, I think that especially with the pandemic, and events are a little bit difficult. So it's thinking about what can we do? What space can we access? And, you know, like artist studios and rehearsal space. And, you know, there's office buildings all over London right now that are empty, you know, waiting for redevelopment, all this kind of stuff. And I think that's where the councils potentially can be super, super helpful in actually plugging organizations that need that space into available, you know, space that's available in London. It's exactly what you're saying, Josephine, similar idea. It's like, it maddens me that there is so much space in London and so many people that need it, yet we can't seem to connect those two things together, or very rarely we can. And when it happens, really amazing, special things can happen. And I think it really changes the fabric of the way that a city feels. So I think that in the future is potentially something really exciting if London can get its act together and move in that direction. Jacob, did you have anything to add on this question?
Yeah, on the point that you just made, actually, I think during lockdown there was a moment when that did happen, which was when street homelessness was eradicated for a couple of weeks. And I think if that teaches us anything, it's that the fact that there are people living on the street is a political decision, and it is one that can be taken care of very easily. And I think, yeah, we should remember that a disproportionate amount of queer people are homeless and get thrown out of their houses. And yeah, just want to kind of echo everything that Josephine said around the centrality of housing to our well-being. I think nightlife spaces are historically, obviously, very important for queer communities, and as Laurie said, they far exceed what they are just nightlife. They are so much more than that, and I think that they need support to be more than that and to maintain that, because one of the things that I think we're lacking is dry queer spaces, that where there's not alcohol, where there's not drugs, that are very few and far between, and very important to queer people who have issues with addiction. And I think actually a lot of spaces that usually have alcohol actually really would be great at operating without alcohol at the same time. I think that kind of community structure is already there. But yeah, to echo what everyone else has said, it needs government funding. And my final thing was, part of the question was about making London an inclusive place to work. And I think that now more than ever, specifically, particularly for trans people, ensuring that there's adequate protections against transphobic discrimination, but all forms of queerphobia is more important now than ever, because what we are seeing with the rise in gender critical ideology, TERF ideology, is a real emboldening of what people are willing to do in real life, and people that would never have dreamed of harassing someone IRL are now feeling more emboldened to. So I think we need to ensure that there are workplace protections against queer phobias, and that those that there is legal protection there. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you, Jacob. Yeah, I think just on your point about sober spaces, I completely agree. Being someone that runs an alcohol-based space, we designed quite a large sober menu. Half of our staff were actually sober, which is quite unusual for a bar. So it was always so important to us, and that there is actually a bit of this conflict in, wanting to make enough money to survive, because we don't have funding, versus wanting to offer that sober alternative to people. And actually, I think it's that daytime, it's like there's very few daytime queer spaces that exist in London. And I think that a move towards that, offering choice to people so that it doesn't have to be an alcohol-based, a drug-based experience if they want to find queer community, is super important. So I really agree with that. So thank you for sharing. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next question, question 5. We're halfway through, lovely. Great, the question's there. What do we not have in place to listen to the stories and experiences of all Londoners, which would help develop support around your needs? So it's kind of similar to some of the other questions we've had, echoing on a few things I think we've already touched on. I guess, this is about, to the panelists, it's like, do you feel heard? And, what would help you to feel heard? Does anyone want to start on this? Perhaps Lucia, because I think this is something that, again, you had some opinions on before.
Well, yeah. I mean, the consultations.
Yeah.
Speak to us. It's that simple. It's literally that. It's the only solution. We don't know what to do with all these new trans people. Speak to them. Speak to the children. Speak to the teenagers. Speak to the older trans people who've been here for years. There needs to be this bridge of communication between people in power and marginalized communities, and yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's similar themes to one of the earlier questions we had. So, but I guess it just reiterates the need for consultation and for that to be an open and well thought through process, to enable the results to actually have an impact rather than actually hinder the process, which it sounds like from your experience is what happened before.
But also, in fact, actually there needs to be procedures in place for living situations, as Josephine was saying before, because that's something that I really strongly believe in. Because also, if you go to the States, it's so much easier to buy a plot of land there and convert it into a commune or something. I know Love Bailey, where it's the Savage Ranch in LA, where trans and queer people flock to make art. It's kind of this utopian solution, but in Britain, land is so protected. Do you know what I mean? Even if you do own land, you're not even allowed to camp on it for more than 2 or 3 nights. This government is just so authoritarian in that sense. And as Jacob said, it's a political stance. Our government is pro-homeless. Yes.
What's that? The Savage Ranch? I haven't ever heard of that. The Savage Ranch.
Yeah, so there's this amazing trans artist called Love Bailey. She's got gorgeous red hair. She says, "It's showtime!" And she does a fundraiser to buy a big ranch in California, just outside of LA, and invites people to go and do artist residencies there and live there, and just full moon parties and stuff. And then also a black trans woman in New York's just raised $1 million to buy this giant house for black trans women as a refuge. Wow. So it seems to be a bit more of a possibility in America, where land's a bit more free. in the sense of like buying it. I mean, do you know what I mean? Whereas here in Britain, they just here in Britain, they literally just put spikes on a curb where homeless people sleep. Do you know what I mean? Like, our government does not want to solve homelessness at all.
Mm-hmm. Does anyone else have anything to add on this question?
It's such a huge question. So I'm working on the NHS website at the moment, and I'm a user researcher at NHS Digital, and it's this question of how might we harness the voices. I'm looking at the PowerPoint presentation, and it's a really interesting kind of structural question, because it really puts the onus on the group to have an idea about, and sometimes they do, Lucia, I mean, but sometimes what groups need isn't something that fits the idea of what's being offered. And so actually it's for the providers of service, and it's for society to actually approach the whole question differently, instead of demanding that the group fit into actually, because there is always, even if you might consult, you get the information, then it's always kind of shoehorned into, it's never really taken wholesale back as the whole information and considered as the possibility. I don't think. Yeah. I hate to be cynical, but I think that's really the case, unfortunately, because like you say, all the research so much research has been done, and it is being done. And it's not often that I think dramatic new things are found. There's often variations on the theme, which is just, like, we just want basic insert, basic decent insert service here. That is just like everybody else.
Yeah, literally.
So it's a big kind of question that I think needs to start even at the way that services are commissioned, and people who are providing those services are decolonized. Like these big institutions, they all need to be decolonized, and the whole ways of thinking there needs to be deep addressing of the fact that it's straight people, cis people, white people, we're the ones with the problem, and we need to change the way that we think, so that rather than going and asking people what their problem is and how they can be fixed in some ways, that's what my thinking is at kind of at the moment, which isn't really very helpful because it's quite abstract,
Yeah. I think it's really interesting talking about where the onus is, whose responsibility is it. I think that's actually a really crucial point, and I think it's kind of a large concept, throughout everything that we're talking about, for people to get their heads around, for those in power to get their heads around, that actually, the responsibility shouldn't lie on these communities in order to tell people what they need, because these communities are also so used to telling people what they need and not being heard. So it really doesn't feel fair to be putting that responsibility again. So there needs to be a shift. I think you're right, a shift of the onus in the way that these organizations are structured, the way that they're set up, so that from their very birth, they are created in such a way that allows the doors to be open for voices that traditionally haven't been heard. And that's going to require, I think, quite radical change. But maybe, part of what's happening now can allow some of that to start, at least, maybe.
Yeah, I think this is such a central point, that the stories and experiences have already been shared, and that the thing that needs to happen is that the people seeking those stories and experiences need to look in the right places and put the work in to find them. And I think the other thing to add is, I think that there also, to be a bit of a killjoy, is that there can be a danger that when whatever organisation says we want to hear from someone, we want to listen to someone, and just does that, that can risk being more of an issue, because it's, I don't know if I'm explaining myself very well. It's like by saying, oh, look, we listened to you, they don't need to actually take any action, right? that it's like, oh no, we had this consultation, you had your chance to share your thing. I think there needs to be more focus on the action. And I think the thing about stories is they're very seductive. Everyone likes a story, everyone likes a narrative. The kind of less sexy thing is like, what's the function of it? What's the outcome of it? How measurable is this? Like, those are the more killjoy questions that I think we would do good to ask. Yeah.
I think that's great. Let's be killjoys. Like, I think that's perfect. We want to ask those questions. So thank you for sharing that, Jacob. So yeah, I'm going to move on now. I know, because there's so much to talk about with each question, but I think we can move on to question 6, which is sort of similarly structured, which is what do we not have in place? What do we not have in place which would help all Londoners develop confidence in social and mental health services? Yeah, so I might start off a little bit on this one, and I think that one of the things is that people need to realize that as a community we have quite specific needs, and within our community we're split up into lots of smaller communities that have even more specific and diverse needs. And so I think that services that are aimed directly towards queer people we need more of. That's my opinion. I think that one example I might give is that I find a service that is really quite good generally, and other people may have different experiences, for me personally in London, which is around sexual health, which is 56 Dean Street. And I don't know if anyone else in the panel has access services at Dean Street, but I found that it really changed the way that I felt about sexual health and sexual health checkups. They made it a really easy service. They really understood the needs of queer people, and they made treatment and testing for HIV much more accessible, and changing a lot of that stigma that you would have experienced going into a normal, for want of a better word, sexual health clinic or a GP surgery up and down the country. And I think that service is really, it's in the heart of Soho. It is aimed at the LGBT community, and I think that more services like that, but maybe across mental health and social service, could be potentially create a really positive change for our community in the way that we access it. And I think that, Lucia, when you were talking about trans people being doctors and all this kind of stuff, it's like, in mental health services we need trans people who can provide that mental, we need gay people, we need queer people, we need people with these experiences. So perhaps a service that is more oriented on the needs of our community could be really positive.
I know Dean Street do trans services every Wednesday, and they do actually have like trans healthcare professionals in. I've been there myself to get tested for STIs and have my hormones tested, and it probably is like the only time I've been in a hospital and felt comfortable. Yeah,
it'd be interesting to roll out that kind of concept, which was maybe a little bit revolutionary within sexual health, across a wider cross section of services that people, that queer people need to access.
No, absolutely. Because I think there can be a real anxiety about coming into contact with medical professionals who you might need to explain things in a similar way to what Lucia was talking about, that you need to maybe do the educating yourself, and that's never a position that you want to be in. And I know that for me, with accessing psychiatric services or therapists, it's one of my first questions is, or kind of like requests is, I don't want you to pathologize my sexuality or my polyamory. I don't want these to be seen as problems to be solved, that my bisexuality is a confused state out of which I will grow into straightness or gayness, or that my polyamory is some symptom of not being able to decide on a person or whatever. And yeah, and it's actually, I don't think he'll mind me saying a partner of mine was recently looking for a therapist, and we had to do quite a bit of research to like find someone who explicitly said, yes, I know what polyamory is. I have experience with this. I'm not going to pathologize you for being polyamorous. And yeah, it's just a real shame that there are those extra barriers there, for sure. Oh, I see we have someone new in the chat. Oh, wait.
I know. I'm interested to hear the opinion of the cat in terms of confidence in social and mental health support services.
It's been a really big protective factor during COVID, actually.
Well, actually, the mental health benefits of, you know, having an animal are quite well documented. Oh, wow. She's like, I need attention now. Sorry, you've been on the computer. You've been on the computer for too long. So have we been through everyone, or Josephine, did you have anything to add on that question?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm taking the question really literally, I think, and what we don't have in place really, which would help us to have confidence, is like we don't have long-term proper investment. We've, you know, the Tories have been in for too long, and you know, the cuts were immediate and harsh and devastating, and I've worked clinically the whole way through, so I've been on the side of trying to have to do more with less, and I've also been a service user. And you know, I don't know how much longer they're going to be in power for, but you know, even though they have, so the 5-year forward plan has got like a special mental health kind of section, and they have put some money into it, but this has largely been it's not in any way compensating for the cuts that they've made already, which have been harsh and which have increased, you know, suicide and mental health have just, you know, worsened describably in the time they've been in power. But also there was a drive to make things more digital, and I work at NHS Digital, so there is, you know, there are people who would like to use an app, there are people who prefer to, you know, chat to somebody online rather than seeing somebody, but people often want to speak to a real person, either in person or on the phone. And, you know, just going to digital first, which is Matt Hancock's kind of view, isn't really the solution, you know, and that's a lot of where their money is going towards. And it's great that it provides another option, but it shouldn't be at the expense of other services. And the second thing is that, you know, lots of people's mental health is suffering because of their policies in the first place. So if they didn't have to worry about somewhere to live, if they didn't have to worry about their finances, their mental health would be fine, actually. So if you sort out the problem first, it would be okay. The third thing is just we don't have an assurance of socialist medicine. We're just approaching Brexit. Despite promises, the NHS has been offered on a platter. I mean, a lot of it is privatised already. It actually started being privatised under Labour and has, you know, has escalated under the Tories. And, you know, people might not realise what that means, but at the moment, even though wait lists might be long, there is a possibility that you might be seen eventually. And, you know, having to pay to see somebody privately is out of the reach of most people. So that would mean no care. And also there is, even though the NHS isn't great for everybody all the time, there is basic governance. You know, there are basic, you know, people can't just do what they want, and they are accountable. If you have a bad experience, it might not feel complained, but there is at least some kind of avenue. It's not behind this veil of a private corporation where it's nameless, faceless, nobody's accountable, and actually they can do any kind of treatment, and your insurance plan only covers that kind of treatment, so you can only have that kind of treatment, and, you know, there are no rights whatsoever. And this is this is imminent. This is what possibly awaits us. I hate to be like a doom merchant, but we don't have an assurance of this, and this would change the game completely. And I think this is, you know, something we need to be really aware of. And also in terms of Brexit, just staff, loads of really skilled, passionate, devoted healthcare professionals who came from Europe have decamped because it doesn't feel like a safe place for them here. They don't have opportunities, and frankly, you know, the pay, even though everybody loves to clap for the NHS, what we'd really appreciate is some decent pay. So there are all of these kind of factors that are colliding to make kind of a perfect storm, and at the moment things are kind of reasonable, but when these you know, when these factors start shifting, anybody's, you know, it's going to change a lot, possibly.
Gosh, wow, thank you for those insights. You know, it's really interesting to hear it directly from someone working within the NHS, and that's really super helpful information. Like the thought of moving towards a privatized, you know, or like a more like American health service is actually terrifying. So, you know, and especially when we're talking about the issues we're talking about today, and you know, it feels like the NHS is such a pillar of this country that is just being eroded, you know, taken away step by step. And unfortunately, with the pandemic and with Brexit, it's quite hard to keep, you know, all of this going on in your head. So I feel that changes can happen without people really noticing fully or being fully consulted. And once it's, you know, once it's changed and once it's gone, it's gone.
And it's for service users. So I was just going to say, we have a lot of employment protections from the EU, but American companies, for example, can sack you for being trans, can sack you for being gay. So the service is diminished for the service users, but also, and also I should say, for the people who are working there, which then of course can affect the service users as well. So this is a big uncertainty that we're facing and that we need to be alert to as activists.
Okay, so the next question leads on from that last question there, which is around a lot of the services that we've been talking about. So, and that is, what services do you feel most confident in using or currently use? So, I mean, from my point of view, I think it sort of seems like it's a bit of a lottery sometimes in terms of where you live and the kind of service that you get. My experiences of you know, for example, GPs is very varied depending on where I've been in London. You know, I was in New Cross for a long time, and I was really unhappy with my doctor, and I didn't feel like they understood me at all. And I had quite a lot of mental health issues when I was younger that I found very difficult to talk to when I was at uni and stuff. Really difficult to talk to my doctor about it, and really the service kind of didn't refer me or any of the stuff that I really wanted. However, I moved to Hackney in the last 2 or 3 years, and I now have an amazing doctor's surgery in Hackney, which has completely changed my experience of going to a GP. I was seen pretty early on by quite a young guy who spoke very openly with me about mental health, and he referred me very quickly to the services that I needed, and they actually kept a line of support throughout as I got referred as well, which I found to be really amazing. And it really made me thankful for the NHS, but it also made me aware of the disparities between the way that people access and can access these services depending on just where you are and what postcode you're in. Yeah, did I have another one? I already talked about 5016 Street, which I find to be very good. It's quite an unusual service, and you know, in terms of sexual health, it seems to be quite a one-off. So yeah, I'd like to see, you know, in terms of the mental health services, I think that it's been interesting to see things like Headspace and all these kind of apps coming through. And I think that actually it'd be really cool that if we could start having more kind of state funded services in that way, like a Headspace, which is state funded, or the, you know, mental health services, which, you know, are a bit more innovative in their approach, which, you know, can be accessed for people. So that's actually not really an answer to that question, but so what services do you feel most confident in using or currently use? Lucia, would you feel comfortable answering this question?
Yeah, because I barely use any of them. Yeah, I mean, you know, a service to me is literally like a bathroom, and you know, I'm starting to use public bathrooms a little bit more, but this is very recent. This is like in the past like couple of months. I've been trans for like years, so you know, even just spaces like that, I don't really feel welcome in. When it comes to healthcare, me and my friends order our hormones off the dark web. We basically try and like do everything ourselves, keep everything like, you know, like DIY. That's what it's called, DIY in the sense. Because I've been trying to get hormones from like the NHS for years now. My doctor actually at one point said he was referring me to a gender identity clinic. And then a year and a half later, he'd left the GP, and it turns out he hadn't referred me to a gender identity clinic. He'd referred me to a psychiatrist in Southport. And we had absolutely no conversation about me going to see a psychiatrist in Southport. Like, I'd have definitely remembered that. I mean, my mum and we were just devastated, you know, because that was like a year and a half of my life wasted. So yes, I've pretty much, and then obviously with surgery and stuff, you know, I've fundraised for that, and I went to Mexico and for surgeries. So yeah, so none. That's my answer. But
Wow.
it's changing. Everything's getting better, you know. Actually, I went to hospital on Friday because I have a lot of stitches in my mouth from jaw surgery. And when I got there, I explained that it had cosmetic surgery. And everyone was making a big fuss. And, you know, when I was going and giving like my legal name, it was like, oh, well, what's your gender? Oh, so you're trans. That's fine. I said, no, the surgery, cosmetic. And it was more like, they made a bit more of a deal about it than what I'd have liked because I was just a bit sick and a bit tired. But it was a lot nicer than what I expected. Like, no one was negative, you know, so I think things are definitely getting better, and I definitely will have like more faith in public services soon, but I think there's still a lot of work to do.
Wow, yeah, I'm so sorry to hear about that experience with your GP. You know, I think that's a really good example of how a lack of understanding from that individual then transferred into a real impact on your life for a year and a half. And you know, if that GP could know the impact that might have had on you for, you know, those 18 months, I think potentially, hopefully, they would have acted differently. But yeah, thank you for sharing your experience there. I think that's really, really helpful. Josephine, would you be willing to take this question next?
Yeah, I also have a great GP. I haven't really used many services actually. I have a really good GP. When I needed therapy, I actually went private because was just sure that I wouldn't get it on the NHS, and I didn't have, you know, I mean, also I didn't feel like it was, in terms of resources, I felt like it was, other people could have used it more and I could afford to pay, so I paid for a private therapist. But I think because I do end up referring people or offering in the line of my work, there is something called IAPT. I don't know if people know about that. You can self-refer. It's an acronym for Improving Access to Psychological Therapies, IAPT, and people can self-refer without having to go via their GP. And you do an application form. It's commissioned locally, and they will get in touch with you, and sometimes people can get a course of like 6 to 12 sessions of CBT and stuff like that. But I know quite a few people who've had really good experiences with that. Yeah, and then other times I've actually gone through work when I needed to speak to someone. There's like an employee assistance program thing that I had quite low expectations when I just needed to speak to someone because I was in a state one day and had really low expectations, but they were brilliant actually. So yeah.
Does anyone have experiences with councils specifically? Because it's quite a lot of what this work is talking about is the experience of councils. Any council services that anyone is accessing, or housing, or if benefits, if anyone is willing to talk about universal credit, or are there any experiences around that anyone could speak about?
I mean, universal credit's just an absolute nightmare.
Right.
It's okay now during lockdown actually, because I think like they actually want to keep people alive. But prior to COVID-19, universal credit was just set up for people to fail, really. You know, we're not going to deny you universal credit. We're just going to put so many hurdles in that it's almost impossible for you to not fall and for us to sanction you for months. And I've noticed that since Tories have been in power, I went on benefits quite young, and it was actually fine when Labour was in. And then I remember when Tories came in, like job centres just got more and more of a hostile place, and more hurdles put in place, and obviously homelessness increased at the same time. So I think there's definitely a correlation between the NHS, universal credit, all our public services declining in terms of standards since the Tories got in, basically.
Mm. It's interesting to look at these issues, and Josephine, you mentioned this before, but as a whole, so that it's like the effect that struggling to access universal credit might have on you or someone else, and then the knock-on effect that that then has on your mental health and actually your physical health as well, longer term. So, I think an approach that looks at it maybe a bit more, and maybe this is the right word, holistically, is that the right word? It's sort of as a whole, could be a really positive change, but that obviously involves like a huge amount of structural change in order to look at all these things together, because the way that they interact and the way that people's experiences with them interact, I think often doesn't get focused on that much. Jacob, did you have anything to add in terms of the services that you feel confident using or currently use?
Yeah, the ones that I have to mention are all medical services, and similarly to you, Laurie, I've had some great GPs and some not so great GPs, and yeah, I'm very happy with my one at the moment. I think for antidepressants, it can often be quite a long journey to kind of get to the one that works for you. And I found with some prior GPs that I felt like I was kind of jumping through the hoops of, we need to try these things before I can try this thing. And yeah, and meeting a new GP and actually making the decision to move surgery showed me that it didn't need to be like that, and that I could have a more human kind of approach where I was kind of trusted to know that I wanted to try out this whatever drug it was. And yeah, I also want to kind of echo what Josephine was saying about the kind of, I mean, you kind of touched on it, the kind of therapies offered by the NHS are still quite limited when we think about how many different kinds of therapy there are. And I see a therapist privately because it would be a very long wait, or maybe impossible for me to get the kind of therapy that I believe works best for me. And luckily I have that choice to do that, even though it's pricey sometimes, and I sometimes feel that more than other times. But yeah, I would really like to see a greater variety of therapies offered on the NHS beyond CBT and counselling, because yeah, there's a lot of people for whom that just doesn't click with them. A lot of people it works, but yeah, I would like to see that expanded.
Okay, great. Well, I've just got a little note on the time, because we are now at 8:35, so we've overrun a little bit. That's because there's so much to talk about. I don't know how you could actually answer these questions in 5 minutes, hearing from 4 people. But so with these last 3 questions, we're going to probably pick up the pace a little bit, move a little bit faster so that we can all eat food and not be here until midnight.
Laurie?
Yes?
I'm actually going to have to shoot because I've got a gig.
Okay, all right.
So the Sharon Legrand keeps popping her head in and being like, girl, we're going to be late.
What are you? Where's the gig?
At the Glory.
Oh, nice. Okay, amazing. Yeah, well, that's, I mean, it was due to finish at 8:30, so I think that, that's absolutely fine. I'm sure everyone understands.
Yeah, no, I've honestly, like, speaking with all you, it's given me like a lot to think about.
Yeah.
And a lot of inspiration in terms of like where to go with Transpride and transmissions and stuff.
Yeah,
So thanks for
amazing.
having me.
Well, it's great to see you, Lucia, and good luck on Saturday. I hope it goes really, really well.
Thank you, Angel.
All right, take care.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay, so 3 of us left, so that'll make it slightly quicker on the questions. Question number 8 we have is, there we go. What do we need to challenge leaders with to ensure greater inclusion for those who experience health disparities? Okay, I'm going to repeat that. What do we need to challenge leaders with to ensure greater inclusion for those who experience health disparities?
I think we just need different people being leaders.
Yeah, yeah, and that's a long process that starts, you know, from an early age in empowering young people and making sure that they have, people from diverse communities have access to the education they need, the support, the funding, in order to get them into those positions.
You can tell Jacob Rees-Mogg all you want about the experience of somebody wanting, you know, needing something.
It's difficult because I think here the question is specifically about the leaders, and when we're looking at the leaders of this country right now, exactly, it's a Conservative Party that predominantly who have one kind of lived experience, and they're also individualistically focused, so it's very hard to challenge those leaders at this stage. So I think you're completely right. That needs to change. Whether it will change, I don't know. We're in a tough time politically. The country is extremely divided. So I don't know when the next election comes around, will it still be the Tories? Maybe.
I mean, exactly. But, they didn't just get in, people voted for them.
Yeah.
And some people didn't know what they were voting for, but really a lot of people did know what they were voting for. And so actually it's about changing societies. We don't care about, society doesn't really care about people with health disparities, and the leaders just represent us in some ways, although to a greater or lesser degree. So it's a big question about compassion and accountability. What they want to make. I mean, there's always corporations, there's always a body waiting to make a profit out of suffering. Really, like suffering is profitable for a lot of people, and being kind doesn't reward them in the same way. So there's some deep questions about kind of structure.
I get
an incentive. There needs to be an incentive for them to deliver inclusion.
And I think you're right to point out that with certain leaders there is no way forward, and our recognition of that demands different approaches. Exactly. And I think that I was really glad that Lucia brought up that she needs to buy hormones on the dark web, because that's a symptom of a bad system, but it also shows how bloody resourceful queers have always been. That we know how we set these things up ourselves. And another example is during lockdown, I did some volunteering with Queer Care, which was providing a service essentially that the local government should have been providing earlier, which was getting people groceries and going to the pharmacist for people and whatnot, and that eventually did emerge. But in the earlier days, that it was queer people getting together and saying, right, we can't wait to convince someone of something. when people are going to be hurting in the meantime.
Yeah.
So I think, just as much as we should encourage good leadership and really shine a light on leaders who take action and listen to people well, we also need to be realistic when we see that there is no way forward with certain leaders.
And be innovative. So like in the, in the tradition of kind of ACT UP, and also more recently like Team Prepster, or people getting PrEP into their own hands. I mean, the NHS and the councils are still dithering about who should be paying for it, aren't they? But and in the meantime, people have been sourcing it themselves, and there is amazing opportunity there. You're completely right. And like caring for each other is a radical act in times like this, for sure. Yeah, I think you're completely right.
So I'm going to shoot on to the next one, which is describe a news headline that you would like to see in 1 year's time. This could be a citywide headline or something more specific to you and your community. So yeah, that's an interesting one. I wrote down one earlier, which was culture thrives post-pandemic, investment in culture skyrockets, which is, something I don't expect to see, but one I would love to see, because for me, I think the benefits across the community, both in the queer community and the non-queer community, to investing in culture is really going to be seen for decades if that is something that they really actually engage with. I think that culture has a huge impact on society on an individual level and on society wider as well. So that's my headline. Someone else want to?
So much of it during lockdown as well. We really have seen the value of culture because we're doing so much of that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, mine would be something along the lines of affordable housing for everyone, and like a new Green Deal, because of course there's the environmental crisis that's happening in the background that's causing everybody who's tuned in tremendous amounts of stress, and also about full certainty about the future of the NHS, that despite it being in peril, it being brought back, and the continuation of full proper socialist medicine. It's quite a big headline, but
I don't think I could put it any better, so I'm going to wagon and hold up the big headline.
So we are at the final main question of the panel discussion before we head to a chat Q&A, which may be quite short because of the time. If anyone in the audience watching does have anything they want to speak about, any comments they want to make, or any questions they want to raise, please do put them in the chat for us, and we'll see if we can get to those at the end. So the final question we have is a pretty big one, and it is, do you think it is possible to build back better and fairer? I mean, surely there has to only be one answer to this. Otherwise, we're all doomed. So, Josephine, do you want to start? I can see.
Yes. Well, I mean, I think it is possible, and I think we are all doomed. Sorry. Because there's a time. There's 10 years. We have 10 years before, maybe less, before we've passed the tipping point for planet to be literally habitable for life. Well, there's always going to be life. The cockroaches and the bacteria will be here, but we're in really serious trouble. And if we can do it in time, I mean, I think over the course, the arc of history, whatever, but if we can do it in time, I don't know, but I would like to think so.
Great. Okay.
That was part of what I was saying about that. I was upset because a lot of the people who are kind of just circling back, this is a real opportunity. Like lots of pandemics have been. There have been lots of amazing progress that's been made after pandemics, after wars, after natural disasters. There can be a great opportunity, but I feel like this really dangerous emergence of like QAnon and the rise of the right is really, and it's distracting a lot of people who would, I mean, there are people who would be aligned with that anyway, but there are a lot of people who would otherwise be channeling their energy and attentions into more productive things, have been seriously derailed and are actually contributing energy in the wrong direction. And they actually believe that they're kind of accelerationists.
Mm.
So I think, you know, yeah.
No, I agree that we need to believe that a different kind of world is possible. And the central thing for me is that it won't just happen organically. We need to actually put in the work for that to happen. And I think that we can take the opportunity given by the way that people have been galvanized into politics recently on the left, but also to respond appropriately to the global rise of the far right and of fascism in various countries. I think in response to that, to come together, to build community, to demand change is, yeah, that's the only way forward for me. And what I've been trying to do recently is, I don't think of myself as an activist, but to listen to people who have been doing that work for a long time, who know the lessons from history, and are also attuned to the working of activism and politics in the present moment. So at the moment, I'm trying to do a whole lot of learning and listening, which, yeah, I think those of us who aren't typically involved in this stuff, I encourage you to join me.
Mm-hmm. Nice. I think for me, I think I agree with both of you. I think something that's really interesting is that the sort of, through the pandemic, the magic money tree has kind of been revealed, which I think that sort of smoke and mirrors around how things are too expensive, or there isn't the money or funding for things, is a bit like, oh, wait a minute, you just borrowed tens of billions of pounds to cover the furlough scheme. So it's like, oh, okay, so why can't we end homelessness? You know, why can't we provide the services that people need? You know, I think that there's maybe going to be a change in the way that people think about things like that. The government, I don't know if they'll be able to get away. They probably will try, but with this fact that the money isn't available, or there isn't funding, all this kind of stuff, it's like, well, if you want it to be, if it's a priority for your government, if it's a priority for the country, the money should be there and can be there. So there's one change there. And I think that also community, I think we've really seen amazing acts of community. I think mutual aid, how that created a service for local people was really incredible. And I think that has also shown people that there can be a different way of supporting each other in local communities. Even in London, my example is that I now know the names of like 3 or 4 or 5, even more, but like, you know, a few, especially older people who live on their own in the block of flats next to my house. I've lived there for 4 years. I never knew any of their names. Just from seeing people on the street daily, I've actually started to build connections in my local community that I didn't have before, so that I can offer support to people, so that they can offer support to me. I think that there is a change there, and I'd really like to see that change grow. And I think that can help us build back better and fairer through the importance of those communities. Okay, we have come to the end of the main part of the panel. All the discussion has been really, really interesting. All the points have been really, really important. We've got now entering into the Q&A section and the chat. So I think we do have a couple of questions in the chat here, if everyone has time to answer those. So I'm going to read this first one out, which is from Chris. During the pandemic, it appears certain issues in society have been rightly highlighted. For example, race or biphobia have been mentioned today. what do you think the queer community can do to take intolerances to account and to promote inclusivity within the community, such as the nightlife scene, daily life, and the online social media services? So yeah, that's a really good question. Can all the panelists see that question in the chat? So can you see that question there? It's quite a long one, just in case you want to reread it. Okay, well, I think, for me personally, inclusivity within our community has been something that's super, super important in terms of the creation of the space, the chateau, and that's something we think about a lot. And I think that it's an issue that is ongoing, and understanding that there's a lot of work still to be done to ensure that the community is inclusive and that marginalized voices within our community are being heard. I think there was an amazing cartoon that I saw recently, which was about the queer community, and it had like white gay men on the top of the iceberg. I don't know if anyone saw that, and then lots of people scrabbling underneath the iceberg, and I thought it depicted it really well. And I think that with nightlife, I think that the online change has been really positive. As I mentioned earlier, I think accessibility, so talking about those who are disabled within our community, I think that conversation has really grown because of these online parties. And actually, it's something that Queer House Party made me realize, really, and they talk about this, is that accessibility is radical, it's like, it's punk. And I think that I'm certainly going to take forward those feelings into the events that I'm doing in the future. Yeah, does anyone else have something to say on this question?
I think it's the work that all communities need to do, and that's involved, I think, a huge kind of just hopefully stock take, and like Jacob was saying, just educating ourselves, really, understanding that we all, as white people, we all benefit from white supremacy, and that we all benefit from, these structures, that we've all benefited from slavery in lots of ways, and that it's really time to start, or continue, depending on where you're at, to really start decolonizing work, and to really be in uncomfortable places, to start asking, like digging into really difficult, often quite disquieting kind of questions about ourselves and about the ways that we live, and listening to what people are saying, asking questions even before, and not expecting. So it's about, again, it's that thing of like not expecting people from these groups to tell us what they need, but be proactive in looking around, really looking deeply, and then really thinking critically about what we need to do so that we can support people to improve things and to reduce these, to improve inclusivity. And that can happen in all sorts of ways, and to commit to doing that as a lifelong thing, not just, well, like Black Lives Matter is a bit quiet now, it's not June anymore, and I've put the black square on my Instagram and now everything's okay, or, whatever, to really continue that on, and to ask questions, to disrupt, and yeah, to continue that, and to mark it against, and to have high standards about what we want to achieve with it as well, because it can be quite, I guess, tempting to have to set the bar quite low, like, well, we've done something now, that's okay, but to understand that we always need to set the bar higher and higher, and to achieve, to always do better.
Yeah, I totally agree with both of you, and I think the only thing that I want to add to that is to build on the importance of educating ourselves about queer histories, and just realizing that there are so many queer histories that we're not really taught growing up, and I've been lucky enough to be in a position where a funding body has said to me, we'll pay you to go and research stuff, and I get to read all these incredible historical documents. And up until, I don't know, 5 or so years ago, I didn't know that there was a bisexual political activist movement. I didn't know that there were, oh God, I don't know, intersex activists in the 90s and whatnot. And learning about these kind of histories and the lesser told histories, I think is very important. I think some of the most interesting and crucial responses to the recent resurgence in transphobia has been historians of queer people who point out that a lot of these same arguments happened in the 70s and the 80s, that there is actually nothing new about this, and they were actually dealt with in much better ways to some extent in specific countries. But I think that importance of knowing that history, so we don't just keep going over the same stuff, and we can actually make some progressive change, is important. Because the other thing to remember is that we've lost a lot of our queer elders during the AIDS epidemic, and a part of a consequence of that is that we don't necessarily have that word of mouth history available to us all the time. So yeah, in my typical university hat on education.
No, I think that's a really great point, and I think that one of the things that felt really important from Black Lives Matter, specifically in terms of the queer community, was people talking a lot about Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera and the people that started the Pride movement at the Stonewall riots, and how actually as white gay people and as white gay men and as queer people, we owe our rights to those queer trans women of color. And I think that lesson is really, really important in terms of helping the inclusivity of our community. You know, people can maybe forget the radical nature of what had to happen in order that we have the rights that we have today. Okay, we've got one more question. Thanks, Chris, for that question. By the way, we really, really appreciate that. And also, Chris, if you are up for filling out the survey, that would be amazing as well. It'd be great to get your thoughts and feelings on all the questions we've answered today. So one more question from Hakeem, which is, the survey link is also in the chat there, I can see. One more question from Hakeem, which is, what makes/made you happy, or what are you enjoying for the last few months? Which is a nice, positive question.
I bought a camper van.
Amazing.
And have been, yeah, I bought a camper van in June. And me and my partner, sadly not the cat, but we've been enjoying some really lovely journeys around the UK, just doing some wild camping and camping by the sea and stuff. And I wanted to do less flying anyway, but it's been really lovely spending time in nature and yeah, seeing the UK. There's so many beautiful places in the UK, you know, so that's been really great.
Jacob.
Oh, that sounds ideal. I wish I had a camper van / could drive. That would probably help. Yeah, it's been the real kind of simple pleasures, I think. Cooking, I've really enjoyed over the past few months. And also just really trashy reality TV. As I said, it does help. And yeah, that kind of, yeah. I've gone into a show called Dr. Pimple Popper, which is exactly what it sounds like. And it's very abject and not for everyone, but I found that it's surprisingly for me. So there's something that I didn't know about myself. So yeah.
And are you watching Selling Sunset? Is it called Selling Sunset? Everyone's watching at the moment.
I haven't yet.
Well, that could be when you're feeling particularly trashy. That could be a one
Okay.
to go to. For me, I think it's similar to what both of you said. I think this period has made me realize, I really felt like I was on a treadmill in my life constantly, and you don't maybe realize until we slightly slow down the impact that has on you. So I think it has been just enjoying simple things and realizing how little I actually need in order to live happily. I was very lucky. I was with my partner through lockdown. Yeah, we made good food. I got decent sleep. I exercised, and to be honest, it kind of changed my life. So, whilst my work life was really collapsing around me, which was actually a lot of where I found my confidence, or thought I found my confidence and happiness, I was realizing that all of those things, maybe I don't really need a lot of that. It's very basic what we as human beings need. And, it's like nourishment, exercise, and love from people around us, which sounds a bit cheesy, but I think that's really, really true. And I felt very lucky that I was able and in a privileged position to be able to enjoy that through this period. So yeah, but thank you, Hakeem, for that question. That was really quite a nice one to think about as well. Okay, so we've actually got one final sort of parting question to end this session with today. I want to thank everyone for tuning in and listening, and reminding everyone that the survey is there. It's in the chat. We'd love you to fill it out and get your thoughts and feelings on everything we've been talking about today. This is going to end up in a report. So actually, you really have a chance to hopefully affect some change with your opinions. So, and thank you to Josephine for joining us today. Thank you to Jacob, and thank you to Lucia for joining us today and taking your time to give us your thoughts. Just like Lucia said, it's been a really amazing conversation, very enlightening, and it's actually has quite fired me up about the future and what we can do. And it's like, I'm not being outside of the chateau. I haven't been able to have a lot of these conversations. So I'm really feel privileged to have been able to meet you both as well, and to be able to chat this evening. So thank you.
Brilliant. It's been lovely. Thank you for having us. Thank you for having me. Anyway.
My pleasure. So there is one more question, which is there a piece of advice you would like to give to anyone watching this on the chat or in future?
I mean, the little thing that I wrote down was just a little something for anyone who might think that they're bi and not ready to come out for whatever reason. I think that people who grow up in kind of queerphobic environments, of course, or live in queerphobic environments, it's very difficult to come out. But I think that there are also a lot of people who exist in queer communities that think that they might be bi and are afraid to come out or express that for fear of being ridiculed, not believed, or even excommunicated from a queer community. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of acknowledge that and to say that there are good out by people working to make it so life is a little less hard for us. And yeah, I wanted to give a little shout out to the Bi Survivors Network, which offers support for bisexual survivors of sexual or domestic abuse. They do really great work, and I believe have been working over the pandemic as well. So yeah.
Amazing. Thank you. Josephine,
I
any advice?
I don't. Nothing that I can think of that wouldn't come off as kind of pontificating or something. I think people have the wisdom in themselves.
Fair enough. So my little piece of advice is to create. I believe in the transformative nature of creativity, and I think that whoever you are, even if you aren't making your living in creative worlds, I think that pouring some energy into creativity and creating something can have huge positive effects. And hopefully through this period, some seeds of some amazing pieces of culture that we're going to see in the future have been growing. And I think that the upheaval has also created a lot of opportunity for creative output. So I'm excited to see that in the future, hopefully in the chateau. So yeah, okay, so we're at the end of the chat. As I said, thank you again, all of you, for joining us, and thank you to Thrive London and to Brixton Reel for organising this. I'm really excited to see the results, and hopefully that the opinions that have been aired today are going to create some change.